It's after 12. First of all, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you so very much for joining us for this very important discussion about the adultification of our juvenile, brought on by the Criminal Law and Juvenile Justice Section. My name is Kevin L. Jones, and I have the distinct honor and pleasure of serving as the chair for this illustrious section, along with some wonderful members that we have here. Ngozi, I'm not going to pronounce it, I say Ndulue, but I know I'm not pronouncing it right, but she'll correct me later. But also we have our secretary of the section here, Walter Anderson of Chicago. If you would wave your hands. We have, unfortunately, we have wonderful CLEs. We have 4 that are being put on today. And unfortunately, there are 2 going on at the same time. I was across the hall to greet the other panel that we're doing, and we apologize for our slight delay. But without further ado, I just want to take this time to say thank you for coming. Also want to say that if you are not a member of the criminal law juvenile justice section, please sign up. Don't leave this convention without signing up. It's only $25 dues. But more importantly, we need your voice, we need your input, we need your expertise to help us, because as you know, that we have a war going on and it's getting worse. All we have is each other. So we need the collective energy, knowledge, and strength in order to make this for a more wholesome society, so we can have our humanity rise up and do that which is right. So again, I will not take any more time. I just want to say thank you all for being here at this, our 99th National Bar Association Annual Convention. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chair Jones. I'm going to start really quickly to talk about each of our presenters, to give you a quick introduction, and then we will be able to spend most of our time here hearing the important story of what the stakes are when we're talking about the adultification of Black youth in the criminal legal system. But let me start out with a brief introduction of Hugh Burton, who you are going to hear a lot more from. Hugh Burton spent 19 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. In 1991, he was convicted of murdering his mother, but a reinvestigation by the Innocence Project, the Bronx District Attorney's Conviction Integrity Unit, and Loris Cohen's clinic at the Rutgers Law School not only revealed new evidence connecting someone else to the murder, but also exposed the false confession made by Mr. Burton when he was just a 16-year-old boy. Since his exoneration, Mr. Burton has worked tirelessly to transform the system that failed him and so many others, helping to convince Oregon lawmakers to pass legislation that would prohibit law enforcement officers from using deception while interrogating people under the age of 18. Lauren Cohen, who represented Hugh, is a distinguished clinical professor of law, the Justice Virginia Long Scholar, and the director of both the New Jersey Innocence Project at Rutgers University, and the first New Jersey-based member of the National Innocence Network, and the director of the Criminal and Youth Justice Clinic at Rutgers Law School. In addition to her actual innocence work, through the CYJC, she provides post-conviction legal representation to clients incarcerated as adolescents in parole, executive clemency, resentencing, and conditions of confinement-related matters, among others. Laura also founded and directs the Rutgers Center on Criminal Justice, Youth Rights, and Race. So it's great. And finally, as you have heard from our chair, Kevin L. Jones, Attorney Kevin L. Jones has been the chair of the National Bar Association's Criminal Law and Juvenile Justice Section since 2021. He's also served on the National Bar's Board of Governors since 2018, starting when he was the chair of the NBA's Law Student Division. He is extensively involved in governance of professional and community organizations, currently the Midwestern Regional Legal Counsel for Alpha Phi Alpha Incorporated, of the former Vice President of the New York chapter of the National Black Prosecutors Association, and also serving on the advisory board of the Brooklyn College Black and Latino Men Initiative. After interning at public defender's offices in law school, Kevin decided that he could best pursue justice as a prosecutor, which I'm still trying to convince him out of. Upon graduation from law school, Kevin served as an assistant district attorney in the Queens County District Attorney's Office in Queens, New York. He recently relocated to Texas and joined the Harris County District Attorney's Office. In addition to active litigation, he teaches Africana Studies courses, including representing Black men and Blacks in the law at Brooklyn College as an adjunct professor. All right, with that introduction, I'll also introduce myself. My name is Ngozi Ndulue. I'm the Special Advisor on Race and Wrongful Conviction at the Innocence Project, and soon to be the Director of the Appellate Post-Conviction Defense Clinic at University of District of Columbia Law School. I'm excited to have this conversation with you today because, as we all know, race affects every aspect of our criminal legal system, but we really wanted to hone in on the role of race and wrongful conviction, specifically of young people, and how the stereotypes that affect young people's experience throughout their lives are creating wrongful convictions. So I'm just going to start with a few a quick agenda where I'm going to set the stage a little bit and then have Hugh's story really take the bulk of our conversation, because I think the real impact of these issues is where we want to spend most of our time. But we're also going to be talking about looking at, from the defense prosecution perspective, what is happening and what can we do to change it. So if we just look at generally at race and wrongful convictions to understand what is happening, we have, in all aspects of the criminal legal system, we have racial disparities. Everybody is aware of that. When we talk about who is incarcerated in this country, about 40% of those people who have been are currently incarcerated are Black. We make up 12 to 13% of the national population. So we often talk about these racial disparities, but there are still few places where we are actually the numerical majority. So of the people that the Innocence Project has freed or exonerated, we're talking about in the high 50s% of people, those who are Black. If we look at the National Registry of Exonerations, which has now recorded more than 3,500 exonerations, I think their percentage is 53% of the folks in their registry are Black, right? And if we think about people of color in general, we get to more 60-some%. So, you know, we're really seeing stark racial disparities, even more than we see in so many parts of the criminal legal system. The National Registry of Exonerations has estimated that we are so many multiples more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder, of sexual assault, of drug crimes. Drug crimes is like 19 times more likely than an innocent white person. So this is an extreme injustice, but we need to look at the specific populations that are being affected. And an important population that's being affected here is young people. So I like this quote. This is from Dr. Goff, who's actually now Dr. Solomon. And Dr. Solomon wrote in this pivotal article about what is happening with youth, that although most children are allowed to be innocent until adulthood, Black children may be perceived as innocent only until deemed suspicious. Here I will also suggest reading Professor Chris Henning's book, The Range of Innocence, which talks about Black children and how they're not being given that presumption of innocence. And then just a quick review of the science here, and I know we'll get more into this later, but just that when we're looking both at Black boys and Black girls, we're seeing this adultification. We're seeing them treated as older, even being perceived as older. So Dr. Solomon, then known as Goff, his study showed that Black boys were seen as 3 to 4 years older. We also have studies talking about Black girls and puberty and how they're being seen in puberty as kind of grown women and what that means for their treatment throughout the society and school and the legal system. And then thinking about school, I just wanted to highlight a few figures about what we know is the school to prison pipeline, where we see school discipline being meted out very differently based on race. We also see, so we see these gaps that are described here in who's being suspended, who's being expelled, who's being punished in school. We know that those gaps affect how closely tied people are to school, how likely they are to be involved in the juvenile justice system, but we also know it's not just about Black kids acting bad. We know that for the more discretionary measures of that people are disciplined for, disrespect, other types of things that it's really hard to have a concrete basis, that there are these really wide gaps that are happening in who's being disciplined, and we see this as early as preschool. You can look at preschool expulsion numbers, right? So with these gaps that we're seeing in school, we are also seeing these gaps throughout the criminal legal system, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So with that, you had a short introduction to Mr. Hugh Burton. We are going to see a moment in time from him that is a much earlier moment of his life, where this was shortly after after he was in police custody. So I'm going to switch to this video.
The money too.
And who's that?
Person, but I don't know. The money too.
And who's that?
Person, bugs.
Do you know his real
One
name?
second.
I don't.
Okay. We have an audio.
So, the money. I said, the money too.
Sorry, folks.
And who's that?
Person,
Do you know his real name? Do you know who that is? Can you talk to him?
Say it again. Oh, when you expand it? Okay. Let's try this again, folks. Sorry.
This is 200.
Okay. And what did
Yeah.
he say to you?
So, the money. I said, the money. I said, what do I call? I said, what kind? I said, my 88 He said, you have a key for it? I said, yeah. So I said, it's going to be in my driveway. Do is just kind of put it, open it, and put the key on the floor. And just come by and get it. So I left, after that, I left for school. Proceeded up to Boston Road.
Where'd you get the key from the car?
Alright, no, she has the key sitting right out there with her watch as she ready to work. Because it sits on the table right by the door. I said, okay.
And did you take any money from your mother?
No.
Did you, when you went to school, did you go to class?
And so I was the first when I was in the first period that I went there, so I went from first student to 7th, I cut 8. So I got at 1:35, I was associated with a few friends. Around to about 2. And I started with my friends.
Sorry, are some folks still not being able to hear? Not loud? Oh, okay. Okay, we're gonna restart, just because this is only a 5-minute video, so, but it's, yeah. Alright, should I try it? I don't think that there are. This is the actual interrogation video. It's not.
Right, it's just a bit of technology.
Great.
That's how they do answer and do that.
That would have been around, I don't know.
How much did you owe?
It was 200. said, you know, do you have the money? I said, I don't have the money. I said, but do I have a car? He said, oh, what kind? I said, I might need you to call. He said, you have a key for it? I said, yeah. So I said, you know, it's going to be on my driveway. Do is just come and put it, open it, put the key on the floor, and just come by and get it. So I left, after that, I left for school, proceeded up to Boston Road.
Where did you get the key from the car?
Alright, she has the key sitting right out there with her watch as she went to work. Because it sits on the table right by the door.
And did you take any money from your mother?
No.
When you went to school, did you go to class?
Yes, they said I didn't go to first period, but I was in first period that morning. I went from first through the end of 7th, I cut 8. So I got out at 1:35. I was associated with a few friends around the school till about 2. And I saw another group of my friends going northbound up Wrongful. So I was with them for a while, and I walked up, and they went this way to the left, and I went to the right to come back down over to East Chester. I got home around 2:47. I stayed there for about 5-10 minutes and got the phone call from Latifah. She told me to come over our house. So I told them at first, she was like, what are you doing? So I assumed that she wanted to come over to my house. So I said, no, I'll come over there. And she said, but you don't know where I live. So I said, all right, give me an address. She told me it was 34A, Fan Avenue, apartment C. You know, I had pink where I wrote it on my jacket in there. I still have it in my jacket.
What's her last name?
I don't know. No, I don't.
Okay, what did you do while you were over her house?
Pardon me?
What did you do while you were over her house?
When I was talking to her for a while, and I had sex with her.
How long were you with her over there?
Till about 5:30.
Okay,
I left, and I started walking back towards my house. Okay, I got to my house. I went in and I took off my jacket. This time I walked back into my father's room. And I saw him already, so I ran out. That's when I dialed 911.
and did you tell the...
I told the operator, I said, I think my mother's been murdered. You know, and they was like, calm down. Tell me what happened and everything. So I told her, she said, all right, police, the ambulance on the way. So that's when I ran upstairs, knocked on the door, there was nobody there. I ran all the way downstairs to the front door, I opened the door, and one of the tenants was locked out, sitting outside. She gave me comfort for a while, told me don't worry about it.
What's her name?
Mrs. Green.
Okay.
And I got my phone rang again, and I ran up and got the phone out of my girlfriend, Raquel. And I told her, you know, I think my mother's been murdered, she passed. And she's asked me, was I joking? Because, you know, I'm known to be a joker sometimes. So, are you joking? I said, no, I'll call you back like around 10 o'clock, you know, say goodbye, hung up. And as I was ready to step back out the door and go back downstairs to wait, the police were coming up the steps. So they came and they went straight to the back, and ambulance came. I was sitting on the steps, they came back out and said, you know, I'm sorry, she's going.
Okay, you gave a handwritten statement to the police?
Yes.
Okay, and that's in your handwriting?
Yes, it is.
And you signed it?
Yes, it did.
And they read you your Miranda rights like I did?
Yes, it did.
Okay. And the earlier step, I'm talking about the statement that you gave today to the police?
Yes.
Okay, and the earlier statement that you gave on January 3rd, so that wasn't a totally truthful statement?
No, not.
Okay, what you're telling us now is the truth?
Yes, it is.
And I treated you fairly?
Yes, you have.
And the police have?
Yes.
Okay, anything else you want to tell us?
Boy, I think that last thing I'm gonna say, you know, didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. You know, any help I can get, help me start over again, be appreciated. You know, because I know I'm not a person not known to do things like that, you know. So I want to get myself cleaned up and start myself over again. I think I can make it better this time, the second time around. Like, you know, sort of like if you get left back, you know your lesson, so you know you go and you do it over again better. So I think that's about it.
It is now 3:26, and this interview is
So that was the statement, and we're gonna hear a little bit more about that, but just on what was left, what the impression that New York, that the media, that the court was given about who Hubert was. Crack, crazy teen stabs mom to death. That's a real headline. So now, as we say, let us get the rest of the story, because we all know that that's not where the story truly ends. So I'm going to start with a conversation here with. All right, Hugh. So we just saw this. What seemed like what was supposed to be, very controlled situation, very calm, laid out everything. What didn't we see when we saw that statement?
Well, one of the first things you'll notice is the time. And it was 10 after 3, or 20 after 3 in the morning. I had been there from the day before. They had brought me there at 5 o'clock, roughly the afternoon before. Also, what you may not see is what you may not know is that video was done less than 48 hours after my mom was murdered. So I hadn't had a chance to process anything. What I had come home to find, that was the only image that I could see in my head. From my house, they had taken me to a godmother's house in Mount Vernon.
And can I just clarify, so you came home and found your mom?
Yes. So when I did go to a godmother's house, I was able to eat, I couldn't sleep. And like I said, that was on the 3rd of January. That is the 5th, going into the 6th of January. So, they told me that the only way that I was going to be able to get out of that room is if I told them that I actually committed that crime, because it could either go one of two ways. I could go in for that, and I could also go in for statutory rape. I had never heard of the term before, and how they came up with that was the young lady who I went to go see the afternoon. She was 14, I was 16, and they told me, well, look, if you don't tell us you committed this, not only are we going to put you in jail for killing your mom, we're going to put you in jail for statutory rape. Prior to this was a first for me. I had never been questioned by police before. I had never been in police custody. Everything was a first. So I had, any reason to think that their threats were empty. So that is a result of me, or them telling me that this is how you can get out of here, because if you do this, we'll take you to family court and your father can come and pick you up. Being naive and not having any connection with law enforcement, that made me feel like that was the only avenue I had to get out of it.
And who did you talk to in that time? So you were picked up on the 4th, is that right?
No, the 5th. They came to pick me up on the 5th, the afternoon.
Okay, so between the time that you got into police custody and the time that you made the statement, who did you talk to, and how did what happened, their kind of threats change the conversation?
I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. My father had just come back from Jamaica. I had called him to tell him what happened. He took the first flight back. The police kept him busy all of that day. They didn't want me to have any connection with anybody. So by the time they came to get me, there was no one at the precinct. But after being down there for quite some time, my godmother called my father and everybody came down to the precinct. What I didn't know is that all of my family, my extended family, were downstairs, and they wouldn't tell me anybody was down there. But they did go down and tell them that I didn't want to see anybody.
So was that, when that statement was recorded, was that the first time that you had made that statement? How did that happen? How did the statement itself come about?
When they were able to convince me that this was the best that you wanted to be able to get to make this statement, we then began to put together the story, and they fed me most of the facts that you heard there. is what was fed to me. And they told me, you have to do this because this is the only way you can give you a family court and your father can come pick you up. So I felt it was in my best interest, in mind, I had to have this memorized and, do everything that they said. This is why it seems like they turn the camera on and it's just a flawless statement because it had been rehearsed many times over before the camera came on.
I want to talk a little bit about the community around you. So you had this extended family, you had your dad that was a support for you, but you also had this kind of picture, this media picture of this, crazed teen situation. How did the media portrayals, did you see that affecting, or just generally the police's story about what happened affecting kind of you and your community?
What it did, it alienated a lot of people from me. My father, he suffered a lot as a result. A lot of his jobs, because the work he did was interior and exterior decorating, so a lot of his jobs were word of mouth. After this happened, a lot of the jobs began to dry up. Just being ostracized by people in our neighborhood, and people wanting to believe it. At the time, it was 1989. We were in the height of the crack epidemic, so anything that you put with the word crack in front of, it's believable. So once they created that narrative, it just made it believable. It made people say, no, we know him. I did have people who did stand with me, but by and large, for the most part, it really wasn't there.
Can you talk about the journey through the justice system for you, going into jail and prison, all that, and then more.
So as you know, I was arrested at 16. My dad and I, we fought for 3 years. In 1991, I was convicted and sentenced to 15 to life. I went upstate in 1992. My father, myself, and the attorney at the time, we began appealing the conviction. The first place we appealed to, they allowed us in. We argued, but we were denied. We then went to the Court of Appeals, where we were denied entry.
For non-New Yorkers, that's the Supreme Court for some reason. Why New York?
They said I had no issues that needed review. I didn't have any issues to go to the next level, so I was kind of stuck with just doing the time. My father didn't make it through the whole ordeal. He died in 2005. So at that time is when I began to, I'm writing to different people, and just trying to get people to say, look, just take a look at this case. Because I realized I wasn't going to get any remedy through the courts with any technical issues or anything like that. So it was really, I had to outright prove my innocence. So I began writing. I went to the Innocence Project, and somebody wrote me back from the intake department, and they told me that, look, we know you have an issue here, but we don't deal with cases that don't have issues of DNA. They then forwarded that letter to Northwestern's law clinic in Chicago, and they got in contact with me. I was still serving at the time. I think it was about 2008. On that first phone call, they had a liaison from close to New York, right here. So since that time, they've been with me. Since I got out in 2009, after doing 2 years, 8 months, over 5 years plus over what I was sentenced to, we began fighting, and it took 10 years from 2009 to 2019 to actually get exonerated and get this case overturned. So a 30-year journey for what they knew shouldn't have gone anywhere.
And so just to be clear, because I feel like a lot of times when we talk about exonerations, we often assume that that's like, you get out, you're exonerated, but because you're exonerated. You got out because you had this 50 to life sentence, so you were able to get out 5 years later after, right? So you were still out, you were on parole?
I was on parole.
You were on parole, and then you continued to fight for your exoneration. Could you talk about the experience of, being out, still being on parole, how that changed with exoneration?
Well, what was interesting, when I did get out, the parole officer that I had at the time, she ended up telling me, I don't want you on my caseload. I asked my supervisor to take you over my caseload, and if I can find a way to send you back, I'm going to send you back. I don't think you should be out here. So, you're dealing with that. You're trying to acclimate yourself with what's going on in society. You're 37. You left at 16. In the height of the recession, people who are out here really don't know what's going on, and you're trying to figure it out. And you're trying to get work and just trying to do different things and still fight. So it was a lot of pressure. So I did manage to get through it. I did 7 years on parole. I was taken off in 2017. So we're about going into 2018, and then 2 years after is when I was exonerated. So.
And then, as you're speaking to an audience of lawyers here, I would like to talk about your relationship with your attorneys and how that was, how you were able to advocate for yourself, how you were able to work together to advocate. What did that look like for you throughout your case?
Thankfully, for me, even with all of the bad, I've always had great attorneys. Right from the outset, I was represented by William Kunstler, and he fought very, very hard for me. And even when we lost that trial, he did the appeal and he didn't charge my dad. He's like, I'm not going to charge you because we're not supposed to. So he represented me right up until he died, which was like 1995, something like that. And his partner took over the case, and he told me that there were no issues there that I had. So again, just stuck with doing the time. The next set of attorneys I got was Steve Drizzle from Northwestern and from Rutgers. And we've been together over 10 years now. 15, right? Exactly. So and then along the way we managed to get Barry Sheck in the Innocence Project. So we had 3 law clinics and for this fight. But I've been blessed throughout everything to have great attorneys who were committed to getting to the truth.
So now I'm going to pivot to the attorneys on the panel. So Laura, first of all, can you talk a little bit more about Hugh's case, what you saw there? What are some of the issues that really struck you as you were evaluating the case and through litigating that case?
Sure. So, first of all, as Hugh said, we've been on this journey together for 15 years now, and it took probably about 10 of those years, maybe 9 of those years before that video finally surfaced. And that was as wonderful as William Kunstler was, there were some issues with his files, so all of you who do this work, please keep good files because it makes a difference. Anyway, from the moment I first saw that video until today, as I'm sitting here looking at it again, and I've probably seen it 36 times at this point, I am heartbroken by it. And I'm heartbroken for all the reasons that bring us here to this room together today. That is a child. That is a child, a grieving child who has just lost his mother, who has had the most traumatic experience you can possibly imagine. And the police are dehumanizing him, and they are objectifying him, and they're not treating him like the grieving child victim he is. He was completely fungible to them. They wanted to solve this case, and he was their vehicle for doing it. Make no mistake about it. The police who interrogated Hugh, we found out many years later in the course of our investigation, had done the same thing to other children who were subsequently exonerated. Exactly the same thing, the same techniques, the same lies. I'm going to talk about those techniques in a minute. So what looks like such a clean, pristine, truthful, open statement by this very calm child is the product of standard police interrogation techniques that are used over and over and over again on children. All children are vulnerable to these techniques. Children of color are completely, are exponentially more vulnerable to them. So here's kind of the process of evaluating an innocence case, and especially a case that involves a false confession by a child. What we know, because of some of the data that Ngozi shared with us before, we know that children are almost 3 times as likely to falsely confess than adults are. And so whenever I am in the beginning stages of evaluating a case involving a false confession by a child, what we're looking for is certain hallmarks of that false confession, and they are absolutely here. So the first is, what did the police do in the context of this interrogation? Because of children's developmental immaturity, because of their vulnerability to outside influences, because of their impulsivity, because of their inability to effectively evaluate the risks and benefits of certain decisions, they are going into the interrogation room in a very different place from adults are. Their brains are just not there yet. And so in Hugh's case, he was made, and this is again, standard police interrogation techniques, it's called the Reed method, you can read about it, it's terrifying. But in any event, they used standard techniques that included false threats, so that threat of charging him with statutory rape was not even possible in New York because of the small age difference between him and the young woman he was with. They also made him a false promise. They said to him, if you confess, we will send you to family court and you will go home with your father today. That was legally not possible in New York. It still isn't possible in New York. Any 16-year-old who is charged with murder is automatically going to be prosecuted as an adult. And it was even harder back then to eventually have children transferred back to family court than it is now. So that was a false promise that they made to him. There were also, what we look for is something called false-fed facts. So these are facts that the police believe to be true at the time they conduct the interrogation. They turn out later to be verifiably not true, but they somehow make their way into the confession, and I'm putting that in huge quotation marks, that the young person eventually makes. In Hugh's case, and every time we do this, I just have to acknowledge and pay tribute to Hugh and his willingness to talk about all of this, because it is so painful, and his commitment to teaching all of us is really such an inspiration. But in any event, the false-fed fact in Hugh's case was that he claimed that he had grabbed a kitchen knife from the kitchen, a steak knife essentially, and that was the murder weapon. The reason the police believed that that was the murder weapon is because when they did the crime scene investigation, they found a steak knife under Mrs. Burton's bed. In fact, 3 days later, the autopsy established that it was a smooth, straight-edge knife that was the murder weapon, but the knife that made it into the confession, again in quotation marks, was the steak knife. So that is a red flag of a false confession. Where would this have come from, except from the police feeding it to him? And so what we also look for is the conditions of the interrogation. Here, as you heard, Hugh was isolated. He was kept away from his family. He is a grieving child who is in shock. He had a whole community of people downstairs in the waiting room, including his father, who somehow had made it back from Jamaica, who they would not let upstairs. Now, one of the reasons they were allowed to not let him upstairs is because of New York's policy of prosecuting every 16-year-old child as an adult. So the minor protections that might have attached had he been just a year younger did not attach here, and they were under no legal obligation to allow him to have access to a parent. So all of those things were screaming out at us. And I think the other thing that was screaming out was Hugh himself, who had spent so many years fighting for justice, and not just for justice for himself, but justice for his parents. It was so clear that he hadn't done this. It was so clear that in arresting him and charging him and convicting him, the system destroyed not just his life, or at least his, I think your life was, I wouldn't say your life was destroyed, because look at you here now and everything that you're doing, majorly altered. But it destroyed his father's life, and it destroyed their family connections and all of that. And he was a victim of all of that, and again, he was fungible.
Thank you. And I think it's so important to hear kind of how Hugh's persistence was what allowed him to actually get relief after the time that he was, we have these systems that are supposed to work. And if the systems had worked in some way, first of all, you wouldn't have been in that position. But you had gone through all the process that you were due, right? So as kind of your extraordinary story, we've heard from your attorney, but I think it's important to hear from prosecutors who have an important role in the system and in this work. So, Kevin, if you could tell us from your prosecutor's perspective what you see as you hear about his case. This was actually the first time that you had seen that confession tape as well. So what's your reaction as a prosecutor who prosecuted in New York but not this office?
Correct. But again, I just want to first again say and reiterate what Laura said, and I've stated to you previously. I too commend you, and I'm so grateful for your willingness to be here after all you endured. And I just want to correct, yes, his life was destroyed, but the resilience and the dedication did not annihilate. And so he put his life back together. So I don't want to minimize his life was destroyed. I mean, and let's make no bones about that. And I think that's one of the most important things. And as a prosecutor, having conscientious prosecutors, I think is what's so important. And thank you, Laura, for the work you've done and everything. First time I saw this particular video, confession, but not the first time I saw that, as Laura pointed out, tapped in. So I teach, so I'm good friends with Corey Wise, which was one of the exonerated 5 of Central Park. And he speaks to my class, and it's online, you can go see it, all those confessions of the 5, the very same tactics. And not just in New York, across the country. And the first thing is I'm looking at, as a prosecutor, the first thing I'm thinking about, where's his attorney during this time? How did this confession come out? And more importantly, just I'm trying to get my bearings together too, because as a prosecutor, and having an oath to uphold the rule of law, there is a case called U.S. v. Berger, 1935, that talks about the role of the prosecutor. And there's an important statement that the author of this decision makes, and he said that you can strike hard blows, but you cannot strike foul ones. And that's nothing but foul. So as I see this confession of young people and having prosecuted juveniles in New York City, and understanding and taking a stance because he looks like me, because many of the youth that I get in our court, and as Laura pointed out, for 3 reasons, and this was in '89, and as we talked about, the parallel is the same, but not a whole lot has changed. Some, they're a little more crafty on how they go about it. But in New York, in order for a juvenile, as I said, he was 16 like Corey, because if he was 15, he would have automatically went, but not for murder still. And then now, if it goes to family court, that's automatic if he was 16, unless it was serious injury, sexual assault, or a weapon brandished or used. And here we have 2, a weapon was alleged, as well as serious injuries, here death. So for those reasons, we can keep it in criminal court, in the adult court, Supreme Court, we call it in New York, but it's Supreme Court, but it's the lower court. But as I see this, again, back to the question at hand, I'm just kind of so discombobulated because I see it every day, so I was not shocked because we see it every day. And we have a lot of New York, I say, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, were you ever Mirandized?
Can you speak up? And the question,
Yeah, so the question that Everett Hopkins of New York, attorney in New York, asked at this time, were you ever Mirandized? And he said no.
I understand what you said about choice or said it or whatever, but I'm sure you can understand it at his age, but I guess maybe that was part of the tactic too, to make sure they did what they were supposed to. No?
we don't know what the question was.
So,
Was it
I
Miranda?
to remain silent, anything you can't say. That was never written to me.
It was not.
No.
It was not.
No.
So even when, I mean, that's a crucial question, and there was a Huntley hearing, and the police claimed that they had Mirandized Hugh, and part of the problem and we talked about this a little bit before, but when videos are crucial, but the problem is that the jurisdiction's video rule does not require that the camera be turned down the second the police start interacting with the child, then what you get is this. So hours and hours and hours of the police working them over, and by the time the video camera is turned on, everything looks beautiful, right? And so the fact that he was not Mirandized on camera does not prevent the police from claiming that they, in fact, Mirandized him. Another thing with regard to, Kevin said absolutely, where's his lawyer? So you can count on fewer than the fingers of one hand the number of jurisdictions where children are entitled to have an attorney in the interrogation room before they've been charged. So there are a number of jurisdictions around the country that have legislation pending that would require unwaivable consultation with counsel and counsel presence during interrogations, but that is not the norm. And certainly in 1989, I don't think there was any state in the country that required it.
Yeah, well, we actually have not got to the questions, but let me let Kevin. Do you want to finish up and then?
Well, there's so much to say. Because I think it's such a robust topic and that's so dense that it requires so much, and I don't want to waste too much time. I do want to allow the audience to come in, but I will just say this, as a prosecutor, that's just a story that continues to be a problem here. And Laura, she used my words. I use that in my class in my representing black men, and how the tactic has been to dehumanize, to criminalize, to ultimately control, and that's been the tactic of black men. I mean, black people and poor and disenfranchised. And it's so important that we, especially as professionals, be astute and understand what's going on and not be so quick. Well, they was charged just because people have been charged, and we just take the belief of someone because they're an officer, even an attorney, that we just assume they're officers in court. But I've found more disingenuous and lying judges, attorneys, as well as officers. And when I just ask questions, and I'm not wedded to any decision until I let the facts follow me. And I encourage each of you in your profession, and even as a regular lay citizen, don't take anybody's word for anything. Like the fact that his family was down there and telling him that, I would fight that no. And we know how we're manipulated so often within our legal system. And because we were taught to believe the integrity of these offices, but unfortunately many of us don't have that integrity. And we can see that even today, from our Supreme Court to our Congress, even the White House, and just our political landscape, that we can trust nothing, but we must be vigilant. And so with that, I'm gonna.
Can I just hop in with that? Do you mind?
Sure.
I don't want to dominate here at all, but I just think this is so important. Okay, so if you look at the National Registry of Exonerations webpage, it's a fantastic resource. And among other things, they do pretty frequent analyses of the contributing factors to wrongful convictions. So if you get an innocence case, if you get a wrongful conviction case, what might be the presenting issue, the thing that sort of leads you down the path toward exoneration is almost never the only thing that led to this wrongful conviction. And the same things turn up in these cases over and over again. And I think partly that is because of both police tunnel vision and police confirmation bias. They develop a hypothesis, that's the direction they go, and then they will do anything to confirm it. So, when the police, at this point, I think, doing their job correctly, went to check that out at school. His first period teacher looked at her attendance book, this is 1989, we weren't online yet, and said, oh no, he wasn't there. So now they had what they believed was a lie. And that's what set them off down this path of turning this victim child into their prime suspect. 5 days later, the same day that he's indicted, the same day as his mother's funeral, the teacher calls the lead detective and says, I made a mistake. It was the first day back after winter break. It was a Tuesday, not a Monday. She looked down the Monday column. Of course he's not there. Nobody's there on Monday. He was there on Tuesday. The detective completes a report. It's in the DA file, but at this time, you saw those headlines. This is what happens when the police call in the media at the time they've made an arrest and commit themselves to a narrative. There was no way they were backing out of it. So within 5 days, they knew they had made a mistake. They knew that he was being truthful in everything he had said to them, and they buried it. And they let this grieving 16-year-old go to prison potentially for the rest of his life.
So I want to segue into the way that race plays a role, because we know with that headline, race was playing a role. So I want to hear from each of you about that, and then we will open it up to questions, because I know the audience is full of questions right now.
And we got one or two. But also, I just want to also point out that I think it's important, and when I was talking to you prior to this, we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, I can tell you what they did. Before he got that confession, they didn't feed him. They didn't give him anything to drink. Would let him go. So these are tactics that are used for a 16-year-old and promising, and you'll see the same thing that happened in Central Park 5 and every other case. So it's not just being tired and interrogated for hours upon end. And you've seen, especially in the 80s, these old, very clinical, I wouldn't call it clinical because they're like drive you crazy places, dirty, cigarette smoking at this time and all kind of stuff. And you're hungry, tired, cold, and promising you, if you do this, we're going to do that. So I think that's so important too, the circumstances, how they got this confession. So it wasn't just easy, because like, how are you going to make me confess? Well, it's easy, because self-preservation is the first instinct. And you'll say whatever, to give me a sandwich, to give me something to drink, to let me use the restroom and go home. Because he's away, his mother's gone, his father's not there, he's all alone. So I think that's so important. Race is so important because it is criminalization. It is the, the mentality of how young black men and women, the sexual depravity, their inability, just the animalistic, like we've seen it throughout time, throughout history, animalistic characteristics that we give, and we take on these types of, and I hear it in the office all the time. And unfortunately, even those prosecutors that look like us, they began to adapt that same mentality in order to move up to acquiesce to what the prosecutors want, because we were talking at breakfast, in order to move up, this is the only way you're going to do, how good is your numbers, how much time did you get off this and everything else. So our ability to look at this and humanize these individuals. See, I see a young black man as a young black man. And I'm gonna give you the story when it comes to race, and I'm gonna pass it on. I can tell you my own example. Working in Queens, New York, I got a case That was a 16-year-old that had, the case came on my desk as an attempted murder and assault in the first degree. The 16-year-old kid had stabbed, there was some horrible injuries, stabbed 2 other 16-year-old kids that one of them could have died. They both survived, but they required some extensive surgery, both of them. But after investigating the case, I understood that this kid was the victim of a gang assault on more than one occasion, to the point where videos were circulating of 15 to 20 young men beating him unconscious. He was on a security school change. At this other school, he was there, and only 3 months after being there, he was jumped by these 2 guys, actually 4. So while he was being jumped, they were beating him up. They had dropped the knife, according to the young man. They dropped the knife, and he picked it up and spared, and he stabbed the 2 guys. And they got him on attempted murder, assault. When I got this, my bosses wanted me, I was the only black man in my office. My boss, who had been a homicide prosecutor for many years, they wanted me to prosecute and pursue this. And I refused. I stood my ground. I said, I'm not. We brought the kid in for a proffer. A proffer is when you bring, for those who don't know, bring the kid in and talk to him. You know, you're king for a day, whatever you say will be used against you, case in chief and everything, as long as it's true. Proffer guy. My boss was like, yeah, I don't believe him. I thought he brought the knife. I think he brought it. We should give, I think, if anything, I had to be crafty. I was not going to prosecute this 16-year-old kid. And I had to argue, push back against my bosses. He said that he saw the knife fall when he was being jumped. He said, but I couldn't pick it right up because in the midst of the melee, the knife was being kicked around. And then at some point I was able to get it. I was scared they was going to use against me. So he stabbed the first guy, they ran, and he caught the other guy, and he stabbed him. And I had to argue for this kid against my bosses. I said, with all due respect, I appreciate you being on this job for 30 years, but please do not discount my lived experience and, more importantly, my unique connection to this young population of black men. I said, I know he may not have articulated himself the way you think he should, but I found him quite credible. And I said, but based off that, it is my case. I refuse to further injure him. And I said, if you want to analyze this, true, the first kid, yes, that's right, he stabbed him. The other kid ran. I said, but his legal negotiation when his duty stopped was not. I said, so how about this? Let's use the Bernie Getz analysis. Let's talk about a person, the reasonable person in Bernie Getz, if you know about that, with his experiences. We're talking about a young man that had been the victim of gang assault, so he didn't know who was a part of that fight or not. So he just chased him and kept on. He didn't know the fight was over. Say all that to say that after many months, and I drug it on, I made sure he got help, but this young man was able to get off with the disorderly conduct. And I asked, and I made sure that I was able to speak to his attorney, right? This young man was right there listening to me and understanding. So that's why it's important to have black and diverse prosecutors in the office to make sure that those who they don't care, I care. My job is to do justice and not to do wrong because I am black. And that can't be my
Yeah, so I just want to circle back to the media coverage for a minute. So you saw that headline, Crack Crazed Teen. So this is 1989. I was living and working in New York City in 1989. Crack was code. Crack was code. And if the police wanted to capture a black child in the system, all they had to do was connect it to crack. So Hugh and I have known each other for a long time. Did you ever use crack, Hugh? No. It was insanity. It was insanity. But that is the narrative that the police spun that they knew would stick. They knew it would stick because of the color of Hugh's skin and the time and the place in which this had happened. And it also is not an accident that out of all of the, we have to remember that at that point, there were about 2,400 murders a year in New York City. Now there's about a tenth that many. But out of all of the murders in New York in that year, believe me, they were not all covered in the media. But this one was. And it was covered with those kinds of headlines, and it was covered with that perp walk picture. The police called the media to let them know they were making this arrest in a case that hadn't become public yet. It was racist and racialized from the very beginning, and that was intentional. And that made its way all the way through this prosecution. So it's not just about what's happening in the interrogation room, it's about everything that's happening around it.
And believe me, I just want to say, the cops knew better than you do who's a crackhead or who's not. They knew. You can look at him and tell, everybody's saying, you can tell he didn't use crack at that moment.
I don't think we said this yet, and we've got to hand it back to Hugh. He had never been arrested.
Interrogated,
anything.
So Hugh, you're gonna give us our last word before we get to questions. So if you want to talk about how race played in your case, we'll also talk about your advocacy now, because I also want to make sure, we've already talked about how you advocated for yourself, but since you've been exonerated, you continue to advocate for others, so this wouldn't happen again. So I want to end on that note.
So what I wanted to say about that is that I definitely feel that race plays a major factor in everything that we're involved in. How so? My case, I was arrested on January 6, 1989. Unique set of circumstances. However, about 90 days after that, roughly 90 days after that, in April of that year, they arrested 5 young men in a park, and they said they were the jogger. Same set of circumstances in the coerced confessions. Different set of circumstances in the cases themselves. But it was something that was prevalent in New York City at the time. It didn't matter what you were charged with. When they decided that they were going to get you, that was the end of that. So race definitely plays a factor in that. And in terms of advocacy, doing what I do now, just making people aware of everything that happened to me and what still continues to happen. So.
And I want to highlight one of the pieces of your advocacy is about stopping police from lying to kids to try to coerce a confession. And it seems like it should be straightforward. Like, for example, in the UK, police can't lie to anybody for any reason, but we're just talking about kids, And so Hugh has talked about, why it's so important, and Laura talks about this unique vulnerability. So that's one particular piece of advocacy. And you've heard throughout our panel all the types of law and policy changes that can make a difference, and also the individual actions that we can all play. So with that, I open up for questions.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4, then 5, 6.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name is Lania Shorter. I am a juvenile prosecutor in Orlando. Most of my career, over 20 years, has been in juvenile delinquency as well as dependency, which I find sometimes are very interconnected. But as a young prosecutor, I didn't really understand that. As an older prosecutor, I understand the connection between dependency and delinquency. I'm too soft-spoken. I was saying, over my span of my career as being a juvenile prosecutor, and I've also done defense. I took a break and I've done juvenile defense. I've noticed that delinquency and dependency are interconnected. When you were speaking about the adultification, you call it fortification and dependency, and I think that sometimes when we see children, I look at them as you said, this could be my little nephew, niece, this is a baby. When I see 10-year-olds come to court for crimes, or 11-year-olds, we have 10 and 11-year-olds in Florida that are arrested. They don't have to be, but they are arrested. And so one of the things that's concerning is how do we get, as one speaker said, it's not only the attorneys, it's also the law enforcement. What do you think would be tactics that we could use to humanize Black and brown children to the point where they look at them as children and not adults? That to me seems to be the beginning process of not treating kids as children.
And I'll take a moment to talk about dehumanization bias. Dr. Solomon, then known as Goff, has the whole study. That part of the study was about the people who had more dehumanization bias, the cops, were more likely to use excessive force. So we know that it matters as far as the treatment. So.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you. And I mean, especially because you're from Orlando, because of little Kaya Roll, right? That was in Orlando, wasn't it? Yeah. So Kaya Roll's a little 6-year-old girl who was sleep deprived, had sleep apnea, and was arrested in school on the same day, I think, as another little 6-year-old was. There were 2 on the same day. So the kind of legalistic answer to that question is we have to stop making it possible to arrest and prosecute young children. Over half of the states in the country do not have a minimum age for juvenile arrest and prosecution. So a child as young as 5 or 6 or even younger theoretically can be arrested and charged and prosecuted, and even not the harm of arrest itself. I mean, this is a direct contributor to the school to prison pipeline, of course. It's what makes it possible for police to be in schools. But I think the harder answer to your question has to do with the way society as a whole, and I'm not trying to evade it, right? But the way society as a whole either recognizes or doesn't recognize that this is going on. So I don't think it's just about training, because we can train people forever and they're not going to get rid of their biases. I think what we need is some sort of, first of all, almost like deep, intensive review of every interaction that police officers have with children, with feedback, with trained people, and prosecutors too. I don't think it's just police officers. I think training, of course, plays a role, but that doesn't get rid of bias. I think it's just a way of maybe identifying bias, but there has to be some sort of ongoing both feedback and self-reflection and self-critique, and that has to be, I think, systematized within whatever police department it is. But then I think also policies. So we have to have policies. We shouldn't be letting police handcuff our children. They just shouldn't be allowed to handcuff children. They shouldn't be allowed to interrogate children. And Kevin's telling me. And you know what? If you ever want to start a committee to try to actually develop some policies, I'd be 1,000% in with that, because I think it's so important.
We're going to go a few minutes over, but I just want to ask, and I know it's hard, ask a question, keep it succinct and concise, and we're going to try to get some answers. We want to get as many questions as possibly can.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kathy Davidson. I'm the Dean of the New York State Judicial Institute. You just met, you presented last week, and it's glad to see you here again. I look forward to presenting again at the New York State Judicial Institute. My question is very quickly. My concern is many people are thinking that all these things happened 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, and they're not happening now. And so can you tell us your views on that and how, in fact, it probably is happening in ways, what we should look for in terms of addressing it? Because that's my concern. It's like, well, that was back then, and we, as a prior family court judge, probably there are cases that when you look at. So quickly, I'm condensed, but you get my point.
Yes, and I think that one of the things that we need to be paying attention to, is we talk about when we're remedying wrongful convictions, we're talking about cases in the 80s, the 90s, et cetera, till today. But we also need to be thinking, if we're preventing them, what are the new areas that are allowing them? And I just want to highlight technology and the possibility of all the increased surveillance that allows for this targeting. Because you heard, especially with this false confession and the read technique, right? It's about, once you have decided that somebody is guilty, the goal is to get them to confess. They're not trying to find out what happened, they're trying to get confessions, right? So if you have surveillance that allows you to target Black and brown communities, we have so many Florida people here, like the county in Florida where the sheriff's department connected their database to the school's database
to target students who were struggling so that for surveillance, right? So we saw that it was about when the police decided that he was the person, they did what they needed to do, right? So we see this every day.
I don't know if you wanted to say anything about the story.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Hi. So one, I just want to commend you on your tenacity even after getting parole to still pursue, your exoneration. My question was about in review of the innocence cases. I know you said you all didn't receive the video until 9 years later. So how are you all able to make the evaluation of that being a good case to actually pursue and realize, what could actually come from it? And then the second part was, what happened to the cops? I'm just curious if they were actually persecuted or anything happened to them at all. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'll try to answer them each in halves, right? So what we did have was a lot, although as it turned out, not all of it discovered. We had the trial transcripts. We were able to interview a lot of people, including, for example, the young woman who Hugh was with that day, who confirmed his whereabouts. She was an undersecretary in the Department of Labor all those years later, and they hadn't talked since his arrest, and she was just so willing to share her memories with us. So a lot of intensive investigation and analysis of the transcript of the confession that we had against what we knew about the case, what we knew about the evidence. And then, I'm sorry, I'm blanking your second question. What happened to the police? Well, Hugh actually can, I think, tell you. You want me to do it or you want to? Okay, all right. So first of all, Hugh, they had almost all retired by the time of his exoneration.
Pensions.
Yeah. Two of the three, this was a trio, a triumvirate, who had, again, done this again and again and again. Two of the three had actually become investigators for the Bronx District Attorney's Office. They were highly decorated. They prided themselves on their ability to extract confessions from children. They are all protected individually by qualified immunity. So there is civil litigation that is ongoing with regard to Hugh's wrongful conviction, but that litigation is against the city and the state of New York and not these individual police officers. By the way, the DA in the case, the one who hid the evidence, became a judge.
Good afternoon, my name is Tiara Hunt. As everyone said, thank you for sharing your story. Awful, obviously, but we commend you just for being here and just being able to share. Kevin, my question is really for you as a prosecutor, and I know you kind of hit on it when you said how you kind of push against your bosses, but how do you do that when it's really coupled with media pressure to solve a case and just a whole lot of other outlying or external factors, even beyond your office, kind of creating that pressure to charge somebody, get a conviction, and move forward with it? How do you really handle that pushback when you're looking at a video like this and seeing different pieces that create for you, for you that you're like, no, this isn't a good case, I don't think he did it, I think there may be some innocence here. How do you kind of really push against that?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. Thank you for that. And I think, we have examples. Aaron's is in the room today. And I just want to point out that the state attorney, that's it right this time, state attorney in Florida is here. And when we have, if you wouldn't mind just a brief, I don't know if you, I'm sorry.
Every single criminal law
Aramis is here as a prosecutor from Florida, and we know that she has been on the front line. So when black prosecutors, black prosecutors, male or female, are being under attack, and when you're doing the right thing, when you push against the system, and we see that evident in Aramis' case, Kim Gardner, Fox, Minnie. So it's a hard road to toe because we end up in the front lines of papers, and even our own community start pushing back against us, and then we're removed from office. So when you're doing your job, so they qualified immunity in the execution of your job, what you believe when you're black, what happens, and I'm going to defer to Alice.
I mean, thank you. I'm not on the panel, and I really sometimes just like to sit and listen. I will tell you, as it relates to Kaya Rolls, I was in the office, and I immediately said, get rid of the case.
So that wasn't even an option. You have a 5-year-old child, and I met her afterward. The child still is terrified when she sees police, and that's what we need to be able to avoid. I want to really highlight what you said about being the person on the front lines, because while you can elect black state attorneys or those who have a heart for black people, it is extremely difficult when you are at the administrative level setting policies. You're not in the courtrooms, and you have people who have these careers and they want to go against what the elected prosecutor, and it doesn't get to me, and to the person serving a term unlawfully. So if you are a young prosecutor, please know you are toting the line and holding it down for those who are elected, and we cannot do it without line attorneys. So thank you all for doing what you're doing, and it is bottom line effed up what happened to you, and I'm sorry on behalf of every elected person that you had to go through that.
Thank you. So that's it in a nutshell. I don't know how to get back out to this. We have 2 more questions. I know we're over time. I know when you're back there, you're after her, then I come back to you.
Hello, my name is Jasmine. Hi, my name is Jasmine Randolph-Taylor. I'm actually with the National Women's Law Center, but I was previously with the Juvenile Law Center of Philadelphia. The question I have is related to, we were talking about the evidence issues and how they told him, had to confess about a steak knife, but then you found out it wasn't the correct knife. So was there any DNA evidence on the steak knife that we found out actually was not, and how was that not a reason to throw this out if it wasn't?
Yeah, so this was 1989. It was before the use of, by the way, huge shout out to both JLC and WLC. You're working with some amazing organizations. Okay, so this was before the routinization of DNA evidence in prosecutions and in courts. The prosecution backed off of the theory that this was the steak knife, or that the steak knife was the murder weapon by the time they got to trial. I mean, the autopsy report was pretty clear. And I think Mr. Kunstler, who was a brilliant lawyer, did his best to mine that on cross-examination and in closing, but unfortunately, once there's a confession, so getting back to this question of how we reform the system, if I could make the rules, we would have no interrogations of children. Why are we interrogating children? But I think that's the problem. Once there's a confession, that just overcomes everything else.
Thank you. So listen, we're going to take one more question, but before we do, I want to make this announcement. I'm sorry, Madam Moderator. We have our next CLE is going to be at 3:30. We have 2 more CLEs. This is the police accountability. I want to acknowledge a few people that's from our section that's holding offices. Our newly elected vice chair of the section. We have Hubert Adams over here, who is Herbert Adams. Herbert Adams, who is a 33-year career prosecutor with Gwinnett County in Georgia. But we also have one of our longtime members, one of the longest-standing members of this section. We have Terry Wiley out of Alameda County, who's been a prosecutor for over 33 years. Terry, if you just wave your hand and let us know you're here. So we have some wonderful people on the front lines who are doing the work. Please don't leave. 1 second. We have one more question that we're going to entertain. Okay.
I just wanted to find out, did they ever discover who killed his mother?
They knew a few days after they arrested me. So when I came home that afternoon, my mother's car wasn't in the driveway. And as I said, I went right back out. When I came back home, I noticed the car was still not there. That was one of the first things that I told the police when they came. I called them, I said, listen, the car was here this morning, it's not here now. If you find her car, you're gonna find who did this. After I was arrested on the day I was arraigned, same day of the funeral, they found the car, but they found the car in possession of our downstairs tenant. This was somebody whom they had questioned on the 3rd, and they said, well, we don't deem you to be anyone to have anything to do with this case. So when they got the call to go up there for the car, to their horror, they saw it was him. At that point, they had a problem because they had me in the newspaper, they had me on the news. So now you have someone driving my mom's car, a tenant in the house, and you can't explain this. So instead of saying that they made a mistake, they actually doubled down. And what I like to say a lot of times is that they actually conspired with the actual murderer to cover up the murder.
This man was on parole at the time for a rape and a knife-point robbery in Times Square. And even still, they conspired with him to send this child to prison.
Alrighty, on that note, I think that we need to end, but I think that that is a note that notes that the way that bias works, the way that the legal system works, can be denying justice. They denied justice to Hugh. They denied justice around his mother's murderer, right? So it is our job here, as the social engineers that we are, to actually address this and continue the pursuit of justice in all the roles that we have. So I thank you all for being here. I hope that we'll see you at more of our CLEs. And I just want to, again, give the huge round of applause to Hugh for continuing to come here and help.
I also want to shout out the Innocence Project for thinking and not robbery, for making sure that we continue to have CLEs like this, not only with the information, but also with their time, their talent, and their money. So without people, projects like the Innocence Project, we have flyers, some Innocent Project booklets back here. So, and that's a testament. So we can only get cases like that when we have support of the communities. Yes, they have money, but they need more, because there's many more innocent people behind bars and don't get the opportunity, don't have the tenacity as a huge burden to continue to pursue, because there's a lot of people rotting, a lot of people who don't even make it, who are dying in jail because they shouldn't even be there in the first place. So please understand that. Be very careful as we go. So take a look when we just hear things, challenge what we're hearing, and see how you can get involved with projects like the Innocent Project. They take donations every day. If all the members of the criminal law section chair would lead us up.